Okay, so here's a wild thought. Could a decision made halfway across the world, say in some international meeting, actually end up being the law in your hometown? It sounds like a stretch, right? But believe it or not, it's a fundamental and honestly pretty surprising part of the American legal system. Let's dig into how global agreements can become local law. I mean, really think about that. Could a treaty signed in Geneva or a ruling from a court in The Hague directly impact a case right here in the US? It almost sounds like the plot of a movie, but the reality is way more interesting than you might think. So the short answer to that question? It's a big yes. And this isn't some new thing or a weird legal loophole. It's a foundational principle of US law, baked in right from the very beginning. So let's break down exactly how this powerful connection actually works. All right, let's jump right into the core legal idea, the doctrine that really connects the whole world to US courtrooms. It's a simple little statement, but whoa, the implications are just enormous for American law. Here it is, the key principle. International law is a part of the law of the land. Now, this isn't just some lofty philosophical idea. It's a practical rule that courts in the US have used again and again. It basically means that international law, everything from formal treaties to even unwritten customs between nations, isn't just for diplomats. It's a real tool that judges can and do use in American courtrooms. Okay, but a bold claim like that needs some serious backup, right? And we find it, clear as day, in the rulings from the highest court in the nation, the Supreme Court. Take a look at this from the landmark case, the Paquete Habana. The Supreme Court made it absolutely crystal clear. Justice Gray didn't say international law should be part of our law. He said it is part of our law. And on top of that, he said courts are required to apply it. That's a huge deal. And this wasn't just a one-off thing. The court doubled down on this exact idea in another case, Hilton versus Guyot, saying that international law in its widest and most comprehensive sense is part of U.S. law. You can see they're really committed to a very broad and very powerful interpretation of this principle. So this brings up a really crucial question. The Supreme Court interprets the law. It doesn't just invent it out of thin air. So where does this power actually come from? What's the ultimate source for this incredibly powerful idea? Well, the answer lies in the cornerstone of the entire American legal system, the U.S. Constitution itself. Let's see how this principle is built directly into the nation's founding document. Here it is, Article 6 of the Constitution, what's known as the Supremacy Clause. And the language here is so direct you just can't miss it. It doesn't say treaties are like laws or similar to laws. It says they are the supreme law of the land, period. And the power of this clause is just immense. It literally elevates treaties to the same level as federal laws. It forces state judges to follow them, even if a treaty completely conflicts with their own state's laws or even their state's constitution. That is a massive grant of authority. So now we get the constitutional why. Let's switch gears and look at the practical how. How exactly does an international agreement go from a piece of paper signed overseas to a rule that can actually be enforced in a U.S. courtroom? Well, the legal path is actually pretty straightforward. Once a treaty is negotiated and then officially ratified by the president, it's pretty much transformed into American law. Now, sure, some treaties do need Congress to pass new laws to put them into action, but for a whole bunch of others, no extra steps are needed. They become legally binding right away. And that brings us to this really crucial concept, the self-executing treaty. It's just what it sounds like. It's a treaty that is immediately enforceable in U.S. courts the moment it's ratified. It doesn't need to wait for Congress to do anything. Its legal power is instant. So, why does any of this matter to you and me? Well, understanding this link is a really big deal because it has very real-world consequences. It shapes just about everything, from international trade and human rights to environmental regulations that affect all of us. So if there's one crucial thing to take away from all of this, it's that these international agreements aren't just polite suggestions. They are legally binding on U.S. courts. And this idea can even apply to that customary international law we talked about, the unwritten rules that nations just follow. And get this, in some situations, these international obligations can even overrule laws passed by our own Congress. You see, this whole setup highlights a really fundamental tension in American law. On one hand, the founders designed it this way to make sure the U.S. would always keep its international promises, but it definitely leaves us with a really pressing question for our modern world. In a time when everything's so interconnected, what happens to national sovereignty when global rules can become local law?